I want to start today's deep dive with a specific image from our source material. It's it's cinematic, but honestly incredibly deceptive.
Deceptive is a really good word for it.
Right. So I want you to picture a coastline in India. It's early morning, 1930. The light is gray, dawn is just breaking, and there's this old man, 61 years old, thin, wearing homespun white cloth.
Just walking down to the water's edge.
Exactly. He walks down, bends over, and picks up a lump of salty mud.
It's such a quiet image. I mean, if you were watching from a distance, it would look like nothing. Just a guy picking up something from the beach.
Literally nothing. No explosions, no grand speeches, no flags waving in that exact moment. But here is the premise of today's deep dive, and it's a paradox that I've been wrestling with since reading the text.
It's a big one.
How does that specific action, picking up a handful of white crystals, cause the most powerful empire on Earth to begin to lose its grip?
It creates this massive cognitive dissonance, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does.
Because we're totally conditioned to think of power in terms of magnitude. Artillery, battleships, GDP, vast armies. The British Empire in 1930 is the very definition of hard power.
The ultimate global superpower.
Right. And yet, this deep dive is entirely about how a simple condiment, literally table salt, was turned into a weapon that completely bypassed all of that artillery.
And the source text we're using today, The Salt That Shook an Empire, really frames this not just as a history lesson, but as this absolute masterclass in strategy.
Oh, absolutely.
Our mission today is to figure out how a soft-spoken lawyer, Mahatma Gandhi, dismantled the moral authority of a global empire using chemistry, basically.
Or rather, the economics of chemistry.
Let's get right into that, because to understand why this worked, you really have to understand the playing field. The text paints a picture of India in 1930 where British control isn't just political, it's granular.
It's everywhere.
They control the railways, the courts, the factories.
It's total hegemony. And often, when we learn about this in school, we hear the British ruled India, and we just sort of nod.
Right. It's just a fact on a chalkboard.
Exactly. But the source material drills down into what that actually felt like for a regular person on the ground. It wasn't just a flag flying over the Capitol building. It was a strict monopoly on the absolute basics of survival.
Which brings us to the salt tax. I was reading through the section on the British salt monopoly, and it's actually kind of diabolical in its design.
Very diabolical.
Because it wasn't just that they taxed salt, they made it completely illegal for anyone else to even touch it.
That is the key detail. India has thousands of miles of coastline. Salt is naturally forming on the rocks. It's literally everywhere.
Just sitting there in the sun.
Right. But under British law, if an Indian citizen walked up and picked up that natural resource from their own land, they were instantly a criminal. They were forced to buy it exclusively from the British government.
And often at a massive markup.
A huge markup that included a very heavy tax.
The text uses this analogy that really stuck with me. It says the tax was like being, quote, charged for the air in your lungs.
It's such a powerful comparison because it highlights just how regressive the tax was.
Because everyone needs it.
Exactly. If you tax luxury silks, you're only hitting the rich. If you tax land, you hit the landowners. But salt. Every single human being needs a specific amount of salt to survive.
Especially in a tropical climate where you're sweating all day long in the sun.
So the poorest farmer, the poorest laborer, is paying the exact same absolute amount of salt tax as the wealthiest Maharaja.
It's a tax on existence.
It was.
Uh-huh.
And that is exactly why Gandhi chose it. I think a lot of people in the Congress Party, the other independence leaders, they were highly skeptical at first.
Oh, they thought he was crazy.
They wanted to demand a constitution or demand massive land reform, big, abstract, sweeping political concepts. And here comes Gandhi saying, no, we're going to put on our shoes, walk to the beach, and make salt.
It sounds almost ridiculous on paper, like we will defeat the British military with sodium chloride.
It really does. But it was a strategic masterstroke. He took a grievance that was completely universal. It united the Hindus and the Muslims, the high caste and the low caste, the city intellectuals and the rural farmers.
Everyone hated the salt tax.
Everyone.
Let's talk about the man himself for a second. Our protagonist here, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, the Mahatma, or Great Soul. The text gives us this profile of him, and he really is the antithesis of your standard revolutionary leader.
In every conceivable way.
Visually, especially. I mean, round glasses, walking stick, missing teeth, wearing a simple homespun dhoti. He's not leading a cavalry charge on horseback.
Not at all.
But the source material emphasizes that his power came from this philosophical concept that is actually quite aggressive, even though it's strictly nonviolent, satyagraha.
Yes, satyagraha. And we really need to be careful not to mistranslate this as just passive resistance.
It's not passive.
Exactly. It translates roughly to truth force, or holding firmly to truth.
It sounds a bit mystical, but the way he applied it was incredibly practical. The text explains his view perfectly. Injustice doesn't just survive on its own.
Right.
It survives because people actively cooperate with it.
That is the core insight of his whole movement. The British Empire didn't rule India because there were more British people than Indians. That wasn't the math. There were barely any British officials compared to the hundreds of millions of Indians.
A tiny fraction.
They ruled because the Indians, the civil servants, the local police, the soldiers, the taxpayers, they all participated in the machinery of the system.
So the theory is basically, if you stop obeying, the whole massive thing just collapses.
The machinery grinds to a total halt. But, and this is the huge, terrifying but, it requires immense personal discipline.
Because the empire pushes back.
Because the moment you stop obeying, the empire will use violent force to make you start again.
And that's the huge risk. The text mentions that when Gandhi first announced this plan, people were terrified. It's one thing to say around a table, hey, I won't pay this tax. But when the imperial police show up at your door with heavy batons or guns, that resolve is going to be tested.
Which is exactly why the journey itself, the Salt March, was so crucial. It wasn't just a protest, it was a training ground.
Let's unpack the march then, because the logistics here are fascinating to me. This wasn't some spontaneous, angry mob that just formed overnight. It was a meticulously planned 240-mile trek from his ashram to the Arabian Sea.
Starting on March 12, 1930.
And look at the starting lineup, just 78 people, that's it.
Out of a country of millions.
And they weren't soldiers. The source lists their professions. They were teachers, weavers, farmers.
But they were handpicked. Gandhi knew that if a single one of them cracked under pressure, if someone threw a rock at a police officer or shouted a threat, the entire moral narrative would be lost instantly.
The British would just point and say, look, they're violent rioters, and crush them with the military.
Precisely. So these 78 men were highly disciplined. They were there to prove a philosophical point.
The description in the text of the march growing is incredible. It describes it like a river fed by small streams. You have this tiny core group walking, and as they pass through these dusty villages, the roads just completely fill up with people.
It became a living pilgrimage. You really have to imagine the atmosphere. There's no internet, no television, just pure word of mouth passing from village to village.
The Mahatma is coming.
Exactly. People would scrub the dirt roads clean in front of him before he arrived. They would wait in the heat for hours just to see him walk by. People were offering food, offering water.
And meanwhile, what is the antagonist doing in all this? The British officials, the text mentions they were basically laughing at him.
At first, yes, they were. Lord Irwin, who was the viceroy at the time, actually wrote back to London basically saying, I'm not losing any sleep over this.
They thought it was a joke.
They viewed it as pure theater. They figured Gandhi would walk for a few days in the sun, get exhausted, everyone would get bored, and they'd all just wander home. They fundamentally misunderstood the symbol.
They were looking at the salt, not the defiance.
That's exactly it. They were thinking, who cares if they boil a little bit of seawater and make a little salt? It's a negligible amount of revenue lost.
Just in the forest for the trees.
Completely. They didn't see that by breaking that one specific law, openly and without any fear, Gandhi was proving that British law was no longer binding on the Indian conscience.
And the press played a massive role here, too. This wasn't happening in the dark.
No, and that was a relatively new dynamic. Journalists from all over the world, including reporters in the New York Times, were tracking the march. It became this serialized global drama.
Every single day, reports would go out over the wire. They're 10 miles closer, the crowds are getting bigger.
It created an incredible sense of suspense.
I love the detail in the source about what happened at night during those 24 days. They're walking 10 to 12 miles a day in the blazing heat, which, by the way, is brutal for a 61-year-old.
Oh, absolutely grueling.
But at night, it wasn't just time to rest. The camps turned into a classroom.
Gandhi would speak to these massive crowds that had gathered, and I think this is where his deeper strategy becomes the clearest. He wasn't up there whipping them into a frenzy of anti-British hatred.
No, he wasn't saying death to the empire.
Not at all. The text says he was preaching intense self-discipline. He was talking about daily hygiene, about ending child marriage, about dismantling the caste system, and untouchability.
He was actively building the nation that would replace the empire, right there in the dirt.
And he was giving them the strict instructions for the conflict that was about to happen.
Yeah.
He was very clear. He told them, you will be beaten, you will be arrested,
Yeah.
but you must not strike back.
There's that incredible quote from the text. Our strength is not in hurting them, but in refusing to hurt.
It's such a profoundly difficult ask.
It goes against every single survival instinct a human being has. If someone hits you with a stick, you either want to hit them back or you want to run away. And he's standing there saying, stand your ground and take the blow.
Because if you stand there and take it without retaliating, you completely transform the interaction. You are no longer the victim in that dynamic. You become the moral superior.
And the person beating you is forced to look at their own actions.
They're forced to see themselves as a monster.
So let's fast forward to the climax of the narrative. April 6th, they finally reach Dandi, the coast.
The tension at this point is just at an absolute breaking point. The authorities are watching closely. Thousands and thousands of people are gathered on the beach in total silence.
And he does it. He wades out into the water, comes back to the shore, and scoops up the salty mud.
And instantly the spell is broken. The psychological monopoly is completely shattered.
The text describes the immediate aftermath as an, quote, explosion of civil disobedience. And I want to get into the mechanics of this explosion because it wasn't just about salt anymore, was it?
No, it evolved immediately into a total defiance of colonial authority. All across the country, people started boiling seawater in their kitchens. But then it spread to the streets.
The source mentions illegal salt being sold openly in the markets of major cities.
Right, and the police would rush in to try and confiscate it, and ordinary citizens would just protect the salt pans with their own bodies.
And it wasn't just the men doing this anymore. This is a part of the text that really highlights a massive social shift.
Yes, the sudden involvement of women. This was a true watershed moment in Indian history. Women who had traditionally been entirely excluded from public political life were suddenly out there leading marches.
Picketing foreign cloth shops, making the illegal salt.
It practically doubled the workforce of the revolution overnight.
And the British Empire definitely stopped laughing.
They panicked. They responded with literally the only tool they truly understood, which was blunt physical force.
The numbers in the source are staggering. Over 60,000 arrests. 60,000. Just think about the sheer logistics of that. The local jails were literally overflowing. They had to start using temporary barbed wire cages just to hold people.
And Gandhi himself was arrested in the middle of the night.
Taken right out of his bed. But this is exactly where the sort of moral jujitsu of Satyagraha kicks in.
Right, because historically, usually, if you arrest the main leader and lock up 60,000 of his followers, you've won. You've successfully crushed the rebellion. But the source argues the exact opposite happened here.
Because the entire world was watching this unfold. There were reports, truly horrific reports, of British colonial police beating unarmed, nonviolent protesters with steel-tipped lathes, which are heavy bamboo batons.
There's that famous account from the American journalist.
Webb Miller. He described these long lines of men walking calmly forward. The police would strike them down, they would fall bleeding, and then the next line of men would just silently walk forward to take their place and be struck down.
And no one raised a single hand in defense.
One. It completely flips the global narrative. For 200 years, the empire had sold itself as this noble, civilizing force. We are here to bring law and order to the chaotic natives.
And suddenly, the quote-unquote natives are the ones demonstrating immense dignity and incredible order. And the British authorities are the ones acting like brutal, chaotic thugs in the street.
It completely destroyed their moral legitimacy.
In the eyes of the global community, yes, but almost more importantly, in the eyes of the British public back home reading these newspapers.
That's the cracked wall analogy the text talks about. It wasn't that the British just packed up and fled India in 1930. They stayed.
They stayed for a long time, but the foundation of their authority was gone.
Hmm.
You can rule a population by sheer force for a while, but you cannot rule them forever once they've entirely lost their fear of you.
And that's exactly what the Salt March did. It killed the fear.
It killed the fear.
However, and I think we need to take a serious pause here, the source material includes a section on the reality check and the nuance of all this, and we absolutely cannot skip it. Because I think, looking back, we have this strong tendency to romanticize this event.
We really do. We want the neat Hollywood ending.
We want to say, he picked up the salt, the world gasped, and then everyone was free and happy.
And that is absolutely tragically not what happened. The Salt March took place in 1930. Formal Indian independence didn't actually happen until 1947.
That's 17 more years.
17 years of continued grinding struggle, more jailings, violent crackdowns, and deeply frustrating failed negotiations.
And it certainly wasn't a peaceful transition of power when it finally did come.
No, it wasn't. The partition of the subcontinent into India and Pakistan was incredibly violent. Millions of people were displaced from their homes, and hundreds of thousands of people were killed in horrific sectarian violence.
The very thing Gandhi fought so hard against, that deep communal hatred between Hindus and Muslims, it just exploded.
The text notes that Gandhi was utterly heartbroken by partition. He refused to celebrate Independence Day. He felt like, in some very real ways, his core message of nonviolence had failed to take root deep enough in the soil.
And then there's the ultimate irony here, which is really difficult to grapple with. The world's great apostle of nonviolence was murdered.
Assassinated in 1948.
And not by the British.
No, by a fellow Indian, a Hindu nationalist who believed that Gandhi was too soft, that he was too accommodating to the Muslim minority. It's a very harsh reminder that while beautiful symbols like the Salt March are powerful, the actual reality of politics is messy, it's divided, and it's often bloody.
The source text phrases it really well, I think. It says, "The path to freedom was filled with pain, division, and later violence." The march didn't magically solve everything. It didn't cure the deep societal divisions.
It didn't. And I think it's vital for us as modern observers to hold both of those truths at the exact same time. The strategy of Satyagraha was wildly successful in breaking the back of the British Empire, but it couldn't magically fix the internal historical tensions of a vast, complex nation.
So where does that leave us with the ultimate legacy of this event? If it didn't bring immediate freedom and it didn't prevent all that future violence, why are we still so focused on it almost 100 years later?
Because of what it fundamentally proved about human potential. The source suggests that the narrative flip we talked about, that is the lasting immortal victory, it proved that ordinary people, farmers, weavers, housewives, could literally stand up to a tank, or in this case, a global empire.
It redefined what power even means.
It did. Before Dandy, power was simply, I have more guns, I can hurt you. After Dandy, power became, I can endure more pain than you can inflict. It literally changed the rules of the game for civil rights movements everywhere.
Martin Luther King Jr. studied this closely.
Nelson Mandela looked at this.
It's the folklore aspect of it too, right? The text mentions how the story traveled and evolved. Local legends started springing up in the villages that the sea itself had risen up to meet Gandhi on the beach, or that the local salt tasted sweeter that specific year.
That really shows you it wasn't just a political event anymore. It became a mythic one. It embedded itself deep in the identity of the country, a feeling of, we are the people who do not bow.
I want to circle back to the central paradox we started this whole conversation with, that tiny handful of salt versus the mighty empire.
The source has a closing sentiment on that I find just really provocative.
Let me read it here. It says, "Empires rise with power and fall with noise."
But sometimes the fall begins with something as small as a handful of salt and a refusal to bow.
It really makes you evaluate the small choices we make every day. I think we tend to wait around for the big dramatic moment to take a moral stand. But Gandhi's genius was finding the smallest, most common possible thing, table salt, and drawing the line in the sand right there.
It's a brilliant lesson in scale. You don't need a grand global stage to start a revolution. You just need a very clear principle and the sheer willingness to walk the distance.
And maybe a little bit of theater.
A little bit of theater absolutely never hurts.
This has been a truly fascinating look into how history actually moves. Not always with a massive bang, but sometimes with a quiet, persistent walk to the beach. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Always a pleasure to be here.
We'll catch you on the next one. Keep thinking.